Good afternoon, everybody. I am Dr. Damania here, and it gives me great honor and pleasure and privilege to be here in front of you to give a tribute to Dr. A.C. Mehta. I must thank Dr. Sarita and the OBGYN team of Mumbai Society for having given me the singular honor. Dr. A.C. Mehta, what can I say about him? He was a doyen of an obstetrician gynecologist, adored by students for his teachings, and very much liked obstetrician gynecologist for his patients. And the very fact that Sarita, in her very first conference to a topic which he much loved, emergency obstetrics, has given an opportunity to pay a tribute to him, says volumes and testimony to his greatness. Dr. A.C. Mehta was born in 1930s. His father himself was a very illustrious obstetrician and gynecologist, having set up practice in South Mumbai near the Babulnath temple, where he has his own hospital. In fact, he was the founder members, one of them, of the then Mumbai OBGYN Society, and that also of Foxy. Well, it meant that always on the cards that Dr. Mehta would follow the illustrious footsteps of his father. But in Guru Shah's history book of OBGYN Mumbai Society mentions that his parents never pressurized him to become a doctor. In fact, his brothers became engineers. And it is only during the 11th standard, or at those days, the first year of inter-science, that he got interested in medicine. Well, he was a man of multiple talents, excelled not just in his profession, but also in arts and poetry especially, fond of music, member of the NCPA, fond of gardening and agriculture, sports. He was an avid sports person. In fact, in swimming, he has won a number of medals, and you can see an almirah full of them at his house, right from individual medals to team sports, represented the school, the university, and even the state Maharashtra for the same. He was a person, people's man, liked to entertain people and be entertained. In fact, he bought a small plot of land near Mumbai, 75 kilometers away, where he made a cozy farmhouse. And it's there that he would entertain many of his colleagues, as well as his students. Being an outdoor person, such get-together were a wonderful opportunity to mingle with each other as well as with him. Home was no less, and frequent visit over dinner with his friends, students, and I was fortunate enough to join him on multiple occasions, enjoyed his company, and so also the simple yet very tasty meals that he served us, he and his wife. He was fond of arts, especially poems, and he was himself. And he would write poetry on very day-to-day stuff, something like the Dadar station itself, something what students would appear for an examination, were going to appear for an examination. And he had a huge collection, in fact, 2 volumes. Each volume were 100 poems each made interesting reading. I read one on 747 and one on the police force. And those were in verse which need to be read by one and all. For his professional excellence, he became the Mumbai Society's 25th president. He was the Secretary General of the Foxy in 83-84. He joined the ISOPAB in its nascent stages and eventually became its president. He was an avid member of the Family Planning Association of India, and so also the National Neonatology Forum. In the Bombay OBGYN Society or the Morgues today, he joined in 1954 when there were just 60 members. He became its secretary in 1970 and was instrumental in its first annual conference held at the IIM building. He also was instrumental in writing its constitution at that time. He became the 25th president, held multiple seminars, one of which very interesting was that on human reproduction. And for the very first time, he got many of the private hospital owners together and held a seminar on private hospital management. This was the first of its kind in the city of Mumbai. He was with Foxy as its secretary, joint secretary in 75-82, the honorary secretary general in 83-84, and also an assistant editor of the journal in 67-68. But the common link that we have with each other, myself and Dr. Mehta, is the reason I'm in front of you today. And Dr. Sarita requested me that since you're from the same hospitals, it'd be nice if you would be given kind enough give the tribute. It was my pleasure. He has in fact written a book on the hospital, The Temple of Learning, as he called it, which in fact are memoirs of his. I shall be quoting freely from the same. He writes that it was sometime in 52, during his MBBS, that for the first time he entered the portals of the hospital, posted in midwifery training. He liked the hospital, the delivery floor, fascinated by the process of birth. He had much empathy towards women, which he developed. And he was sure that he would return someday here as a resident doctor. And soon later, his first posting as a resident accoucheur came in around 50. The labor ward duties in those days were for a whole week stretch, day and night. He mentions that that made us resilient and tough. Number of obstructed labors, antepartum hemorrhages, eclampsias, severe anemias. The C-section rate was 3% only at the time. Elective CS, unheard of. For every CS that they did or a maternal mortality, he would be lined up for the firing squad of the Dr. Masani, who was then principal medical officer, today the medical director or the dean subsequently. Well, I would have died a number of times if for every CS we did, we would have been in front of a firing squad. He actually felt very sorry when he left the hospital. He had fallen in love with the hospital. It was a temple to him, and it remained so decades later on. He rejoined as after his MD in 57 under Dr. Patwardhan and Mutasha. And he developed a relationship of Guru's Shishya with the institute and hospital. He decided to forget the world around him, not to go home, not to take a holiday, devote all his time and energy at task at hand. The more you give, the more blessings you return from patients. Your learning is a long-lasting investment, is what he writes. And that's the faculty that existed in 58 at the time, and the staff, the residents as well as the office staff, all doyens of those days. And you can see right in the middle here, the principal medical officer, Dr. Masani, has two textbooks, that on obstetrics and gynecology. Seated to his left is Julia Disa, herself an obstetrician. She was a teacher, in fact, from Grant Medical College. Subsequently, when Dr. A.C. Mehta became a teacher of Grant Medical College, we had 2 units on those days from Grant Medical College and 2 units from GS Medical College. Dr. Mota Shayar, pretty lady there, again from GS Medical College as an assistant honorary. Of the Patwardhan Manohar fame for a deeply impacted head in the pelvis during cesarean section, a great surgeon, the doyen of obstetrics and gynecology, the first Indian to become the FIGO president, Dr. Purandare, B.N. Purandare, Dr. Dina Patel, who subsequently became the dean, and the master vaginal surgeon, Dr. V.N. Purandare. These were the faculty. Behind, nonetheless, than Dr. M.N. Parikh, a resident accoucheur, a house surgeon in those days, Dr. Soonawala, a registrar, famous now, Dr. L.M. Shah, a big practitioner in Ghatkopar subsequently the head of department of J.J. Hospitals and Grand Medical College, Dr. Bomsi Wadia. You have Dr. Mulgaonkar here of the Mulgaonkar forceps fame, who Dr. Usha Krishna fondly remembers, and the pretty lady there, Dr. Usha Krishna herself, even pretty today. Behind here is Dr. V.G. Daftari, the pathologist of the hospital, who subsequently founded Bharat Serums in 71, which has now become an international company. You have here Dr. Murli Kamath, gyno-oncologist, in a house surgeon post in obstetrics, subsequently joined the Tata Hospital to become the doyen of gyno-oncology. And that there is Rusi, my father, who joined as a young clerk and assistant to the assistant PMO, rose subsequently to the chief executive of the hospital. Men and women of the old school. God doesn't make such people at the moment of time. And that's sad. All doyens. Dr. Ajit Mehta became the registrar at KM in 58-59 and worked under Dr. Purandare. Did a house surgeon's post in Tata Memorial Hospital, and that stood him great stead for his subsequent surgical skills. His father coaxed him to do a study tour of different countries and meet eminent authorities, which he did. And the year of 60s was spent in that. Back home, he had written 2 publications, one of which was in the British Journal at the time. The British Journal publication with M.N. Parikh on the open os in the 2nd trimester gave him much recognition. His cervical types are well known. Even today, we would use them for induction of labor and predicting preterm births. He joined back to Wadia in 61 as an assistant honorary with Julia Disa. He also took over practice of his father in 1968 when his father retired and left for Baroda. But he writes about himself in his memoirs that in spite of private practice, he never wavered from his duties to the hospital clinical work, so also research. His Vespa two-wheeler was his main vehicle, which remained so for 12 years. Since I had to visit Wadia Hospital almost every other night as an honor. This vehicle was convenient and economical. The road traffic was not heavy, but often dust blackened my face. With such dedication, he would become the dean in 1984 of the hospital, and subsequently its director in 89. As the dean, he was ahead of his times. And in 1985, when nothing like an HDU was heard of in obstetrics, he started and called it the ILCU, as we termed it then, the Intensive Labor Care Unit. And in fact, it was a donation that Vinita, my wife, and her father did get from certain donors, that this unit was formed with monitors, a separate nursing staff, and even a small ultrasound machine, primitive, yet still available. A great boon in those days for us on the labor floor. He subsequently went on to establish a level 2 spatial NICU, which is now very popular amongst the people, amongst the gynecologists of the hospital, and so also the city. He started an epidemiological department. He was very fond of that subject. Maternal care monitoring and data collection was his forte. And he, over a period as a research director, collected data of a number of about 150 aspects of childbirth, of consecutive deliveries. For us, as registrars, subsequently lecturers and associate professors, Getting data was much simpler. Putting publications became very easy because when we could correlate data through the computer would allow us to, in fact, correlate 3 different parameters immediately. Statistics became easy too. His love for fetal pathology was there and was a pioneer for fetal pathology with the pathological department of the YDA Hospital. Research work, if I might say, was adventurous. In 1972, he collaborated with Sultan Karim, the pioneer of prostaglandins, brought in prostaglandins to our shores in Wadia Hospital, started, if I might use the term, experiments with second trimester terminations and inductions of labor. And the residents of those days, one of them being Swati Dave, would remember the MTPs that they performed in the second trimester with prostaglandins, weighed those fetuses, measured their lengths, and eventually went on to create the gravidogram of weeks of gestation with their weights and their lengths. He had an algorithm for early detection of thalassemias and identification. He was a pioneer to use the ELISA torch infection test at the time. Hematology was his pet subject, and he took great interest on it. His work on mishery use in pregnancy, tobacco dentifrice, is legendary and made us all aware that nearly 7% of women in our antenatal at Wadia were mishery users and was responsible for growth restriction. He changed that 5 and 7 day emergency to the 1 day emergency, and I bless him for that. The interactive academic programs were a wonderful experience, and I still remember a workshop which he held over 25 days or nearly a month, nearly 100 faculties, many of them national and nearly about 10 to 15 international faculty, who stayed with him at his own residence. And that was an experience par excellence for us. A study tour, rather than we going to 15 countries, the best 15 people had come to us. Well, in administration at the hospital, the administration was much laid out, and he did not disturb that. And that itself is a great thing. He did introduce computers, he added on. Computers, yes, the staff initially were skeptical about it, but eventually it got so used to it that things became much more simpler by the use of computers in administration, be it salaries, be it invoices, so on and so forth. He went into great detail, very minute inspection of hospital areas, and he thought that it was an anointment to my father and the matron. And I can assure that it was not to be, because never did Mr. Damania ever grumble, and both their aims and objectives was the betterment of the hospitals itself. And on a personal note, I can definitely say that he was a man of unquestionable integrity. He took care of his juniors, made them strong, gave them position in their studies and later in their assignments. And here is Dr. Manohar Motwani, who is now the HOD of Rajawadi Hospital. And he remembered the grand rounds which lasted 4 hours. His leg would pain, but he was richer in knowledge. Dr. Jasawala was his house surgeon. And he mentions that the trial and tribulations were good because the rigorous duties we performed. He today can stand to any form of pressure without breaking down. And now I know the secret of him standing the pressures at Wadia hospitals. Well, Uday Thanwala and Nilangsha were his house surgeons too. And they do emphasize his keenness for vaginal birth. And Uday does remember 2 previous LSCS induced and washed all through labor, eventually delivering vaginally. He had no option. And he do remember those mementos that he gave to his residents if they manage an emergency without a cesarean section. On a personal note, Uday's daughter shares birthday with him. In fact, he was supposed to go on a birthday party with his family, but so was his dedication. His family went, he declined, stayed and delivered her. With Praveen Gord, who was his resident, got him interested in research, encouraged him, did his PhD subsequently in Belgium, and today is a consultant in California and attached to the University Medical School there. This is postdoctoral in Yale University. Dr. Karthik Bhagat mentions those grilling perinatal mortality and morbidity sessions that he has had, lessons learned by all of us. Dr. Rajkumar Shah emphasizes his gynecological skills, the Verdam hysterectomies that he did with a very good cuff dissection done vaginally. Dr. Usha Krishna was his house surgeon at the KM hospital and emphasizes of his precisionness, especially in his paperwork and even in patient care. And she talks of Rashila Ben, his wife, fiancée at that time, having met her before, who has stood through him like solid support at home, running his maternity hospital, and later in developing his farm. Dr. Rohit Bhatt, the doyen of obstetrics gynecology in Baroda, what he did learn from Dr. Mehta was to get his interests, other hobbies, develop it and enjoy life. And here he was, very frequent visitor to his house, frequent in trips abroad with him, and here in Maldives. Well, with Dr. M.R. Narvekar, the common love for bridge brought them together, especially in the last 7-8 years, and definitely a frequent visitor for all weekends that he went to his farm. Dr. Daftari, this slide says it all. Dr. Daftari, the teacher of teachers, was his house surgeon, his registrar, and his subsequent assistant honorary when Dr. A.C. Mehta was his boss. And what more can we say about somebody who is himself a teacher to the teacher of teachers? And to end now, I give you a few family photographs. First of his extended family, here with Dr. C.G. Saraya, his teacher, with his family here in the center. Yes, you have his two daughters here, Nandita and Sujata, both settled in the USA. With us here, with Dr. Matre, with his extended family at Divadia Hospital, with his colleagues, he had great rapport, with the nurses, ward boys, the Ayabai, Maushis, all fond of him. With his immediate family, his son Ajay, a fetal medicine expert of repute, wife Rashila Ben, very hospitable. I enjoy her meals, simple and very tasty. Wife, Ajay's wife, daughter-in-law, Trupti, pathologist by profession, but today helps Ajay in the running of the hospital and maternity hospital. And that's the latest 4th generation gynecologist, Nishita, the granddaughter, who herself has just passed out recently from GS Medical College and KM Hospital, and now undergoing training at the St. George's Hospital in London. And here is the latest addition to the family, Nishita, just engaged to Aman, who himself is doing MBA in the London Business School in UK. And that's the tribute that Nishita writes for her Dada. And I end this talk here, this tribute here, this stanza from Nishita's poem for his granddad. Nishita was his favorite, and Nishita's favorite too was him. Although today Sir is no longer with us physically, for having left us in June last year, his wisdom, his teachings, his idealism will remain the talk of conferences amongst colleagues and amongst his students, especially on the ward rounds, which I often quote. And such immortality can only be envied. I end with what Ajay, his son, says. It's been almost a year that we have lost him physically, but his spirit, his values, his memories are etched forever in our minds and a special place in our hearts. So let us celebrate his life, for he strongly believed, miss me, but let me go. Thank you very much, Dr. Sarita, our president, and the team of MOGS, for giving me this opportunity to give the tribute to Dr. A.C. Mehta.